pulls, then he goes on his phone and then he's like turning on his GPS and normally in New England there are no street signs or anything, but he just happened to be at an intersection right by it says Mass Ave on one side and some other side street. Like I was literally standing under the street sign and he had to go look at his phone to figure out where he was.
Oh, sure. He looked forward, he looked to the side, to the left, to the right, but he forgot to look up.
I've seen a lot of strange things out there. I'm sure everybody else has too.
At the 1994 Unix Expo in New York City, we all went out to dinner with the Linux community, 20 of us, I guess, maybe 15. And one of the people at dinner was an NYU grad student. And we went up to the Stage Deli up near Carnegie Hall. And at the end of dinner, he needed directions to get home to NYU. So I'm explaining to him, I'm not a New Yorker, explaining to him how to take the subway back to NYU. And I said, I'm kind of surprised that, you live in New York City and in Manhattan and you're not familiar with how to get to NYU from Midtown. He said, I've never been up this far north before.
Yeah, I can see that. But I had a similar experience in New York. I was at my uncle's apartment, and he was a professor at NYU, and I was in faculty housing. And I left, I went down to the subway, and a train came in, and a bunch of guys just ran out of the train at full speed. And I had no idea what was happening. And what it was is that it was a trash crew. And they go out there, they run around, pick up all the trash, bring it into the train, and leave. But, it's very scary when they all jump out at one time at you.
I recently had some driving problems in Foxborough, where I have my Toastmaster meetings. I was heading in the way I normally do, and an important road in the middle of the Foxborough was blocked off, so I had to detour around it. And I was going down all sorts of roads I'd never been on before in Foxborough. And my GPS kept leading me back to the roadblock like 3 times before I just finally said, I'm going to head 20 miles straight in this direction, and then hopefully I'll be somewhere where it won't lead me back.
Okay, I'm going to take a quick break. I'm going to fill up my drink.
Okay.
Talking about using phones for navigating and relying on it and getting used to that's the only way. That's okay if you're in civilization, and you can always, if you get completely desperate, you can stop and ask a stranger or a cop or something. But if you ever leave civilization, go out into a state park or out in the desert somewhere in your car or on foot, never do that without a map, without a paper map. Because when you get in trouble, that's when your phone's going to die.
No, the thing to do in that situation is use a drone to follow the route as a dry run the day before from the comfort of it. Let you map it out for yourself.
A few decades ago, we were doing a search and rescue operation in the Rhode Island wilderness down in the Exeter area, and one of the searchers got lost, and he was on the radio saying, "I don't know where I am. How do I get back to rendezvous point?" And I happened to be driving directly past him. I saw him standing at the intersection of 2 roads. Excuse me. And so I got on the radio and I said, "Well, you fortunately are standing at the intersection of 2 roads. And I just passed you." And he said, "Oh, no, I'm nowhere near there." I said, "No, you don't understand. I just drove past you. I saw you standing at the intersection of these 2 roads." He says, No, I'm nowhere near there. You're mistaken." And I said, "You're on your own."
That reminds me of something that happened to me at the Linux Expo in New York. I think it was in '99. I was in the middle of one of the corridors coming off an escalator, and I heard these 2 guys trying to find each other on the phone. I could hear both sides of the conversation. Of course, being New York, I caught the attention of one of the guys and said, "The guy you're trying to find is right over here." I pointed. He didn't even look where I pointed. He just said, "Fuck off," and then continued trying to find his friend. I guess he didn't want help. Or maybe it was suspicious behavior because New Yorkers aren't supposed to help each other. I don't know.
New York is strange. I mean, I remember this would have been the late 70s. My friends and I were going to take a ham radio exam. And in those days, you had to go to the FCC office. And we were all going to start school in September. So the last week before school started, we were going to go up to Boston. I called Boston, and they said, "Oh, no, the examiner's in Bangor. We're not doing it this week." So we were kind of scrambling, and I said, "Well, let's go to New York City." So we drove to New York City, to the FCC office, which is right near where the World Trade Centers were. And we got there really early, walking around and get breakfast and so on. And for some reason, people kept stopping me and asking me for street directions in New York City. And weirdly enough, I could usually answer their questions. But I've never understood why, A, people in Manhattan would be asking me for directions, why I look like the person to ask for directions, and B, how tough is it to find something on a grid? Never got it.
Well, parts of Manhattan can be a little confusing. And why people think you're from there, I would have no idea.
Well, I think they were just randomly approaching somebody. I don't know what it was. But yeah. The idea is that, yes, there are parts in southern Manhattan that are not on the grid, especially down near the FCC, which is down on Barracks Street, the federal building. So the streets are not numbered that far south. It was odd.
Well, one of the strangest places is New Orleans, because the streets labeled south are north with respect to the Mississippi.
Well, Boston for a while had that problem with I think it was like 128 south and 95 north with the same stretch of pavement.
They are. It's not. What they did is they labeled 128 south from I-95 down to the real 93 to Route 3 as 93 north. So you're going south on 128 and you're going north on I-93. That was to get federal funding.
I guess that would be a reasonable explanation for it. A friend of mine one time was sitting at a truck stop in Central Rhode Island along Interstate 95, and some people came in late, early hours of the morning, like 2 a.m. or something. And they said, "Hey, how far is to Virginia Beach?" And he said, "Oh, it's about 10 hours." And they said, "Oh, we ought to be almost there by now. We've been driving for 5 hours. It only took us 5 hours to get there." He said, "Where are you coming from?" And they said, "We're coming from Atlantic City." They said, "Well, I've got bad news for you. You're going the wrong way." They said, "No, we can't be going the wrong way. We used the same road to get home that we used to get there." Which road was that? 95 north. See the problem here.
Yep.
There's actually a joke about this a while ago that I read, that some people wanted to go to New York City from Boston and started driving. And then like about 4 hours later, they get to a like toll booth type thing. And they figured, oh, I'm entering New York City, play tolls. And then the officer stopped them. And then he said, like, "How much is for the toll?" And he said, "Sir, this is Canadian customs."
I personally, one time many years ago, was what was then the Howard Johnsons in a little village in Round called Wyoming. And again, this was 2, 3 in the morning, and the group of people came in, and they start just having a discussion with each other. Where are we? "Oh, I think we're in Connecticut. I saw a sign for Connecticut." "No, I think we're in Massachusetts. I saw a sign for Massachusetts." "I saw a sign for Pennsylvania. I think we're in Pennsylvania." So finally, they turned to me and said, "Where are we?" I said, "You're in Wyoming." It's no, really. Where are we? And I pointed to the giant sign over the entrance that said Wyoming, because of course we were in the village of Wyoming. And they freaked out and started throwing things at each other. "You idiot! You drove us to Wyoming."
That's got to be the longest of this discussion.
Yeah, I didn't think that they'd actually believe me.
They may not. They may have thought they were on the East Coast, but they may not have left from somewhere that far away.
Yeah,
I think
too
I could
bad
see
there
it.
are no Hojos left.
Well, this was probably 30 years ago.
Well, maybe they didn't do so well in high school when they were taking geography.
I guess, but it's one thing to get off an airplane and not know where you are. It's another thing to get out of a car and have no idea where you are by that time.
Yeah, I used to drive to in New Orleans. I used to drive from Tulane down across Canal Street before the interstates, and I'd stop at a Howard Johnson's on what they call Airline Highway. It was the only one in the whole New Orleans area. I'd get my fried clams and hush puppies, and then go out to the airport and fly. That was when I was in ROTC flight training, and I wanted to get my commercial license. And it was crazy. I passed Fats Domino's house. Doesn't exist anymore. That's the area that got flooded during Katrina. But that was really a crazy place. But what I'd do is I'd leave the top down of my car, because in New Orleans, you can essentially set your watch by the time it rains. And I knew that the thunderstorm would be at a certain time. So I'd get on the piece of interstate that I would take, and the windshield prevented me from getting wet. So I'd go out to the airport. By the time I got to Howard Johnson's, the rain had stopped and I was off the interstate. The interstate was only like 2 miles long at that point. And of course, another thing we used to do was to have dogfights, simulated dogfights, and land on Interstate 10, which at that time was just being built. It wasn't completed, so there were no cars. These were a bunch of prospective military pilots.
You hear about the bar bet in New York City about something like 60 years ago that culminated in going out to Teterboro Airport, stealing an instructor's plane, or stealing a plane from a flight school, because the person who made the bet was like a student at the flight school. Anyway, stole a plane middle of the night and landed it on the street in Manhattan because he made a bet that said that he could. And it was a small plane that just barely fit between the lights on one side of the street and the lights on the other. The cops couldn't believe what happened when they were called. And then after he got sent to prison for like a few months for it, and judge told him basically never do that again. And they were telling the story in the bar years later, and somebody said, no, you're shitting me. I don't believe that happened. And the guy that did it went and stole the plane and did it again.
I guess it's time to start the meeting.
Just shared my other screen just to make sure it was working.
Yeah. Usually, when we were in person, I'd start the meeting around 7:15, because you'd announce it for 7 o'clock, and people would still be walking in at 8 o'clock.
Mm-hmm.
So, what time do you guys want to start?
I'll give you another 10 minutes or so.
Okay.
So I used to have a problem with my students who would come in later and later. It was the class right after lunch, and it was springtime, and they were seniors, and they'd be out on the grass playing frisbee. And I got pissed off because they were wasting my time. So I told them on a Friday that the following Monday I was going to come in and start the class exactly at 1 o'clock. And I would start writing things on the blackboard and taking my own sweet time of doing it. But when I got to the end of the blackboard, I would then turn around and start erasing the blackboard at the beginning and writing additional notes. And I told them that the next day there would be a pop quiz. And the most important items would be the ones which I had talked about first. So Monday came, there were no students in the class. I started talking, waving my arms, writing on the board. And who would come by except the dean of instruction, who looked in at me, talking to an empty room, writing on the board. I waved at the dean because I'm a friendly person. And about 5 minutes later, one of the students came in, barefoot, frisbee underneath his arm, looked at the board. It was almost filled with notes, and said, "Oh my God, he's doing it." Ran back outside, started screaming at his friends, who came into the room and started scribbling down notes as fast as they could as I was erasing the board. And of course, the next day, there was a pop quiz, and the class went from the normal B's and C's to C's and D's, and they were never late again. A corollary to this were the students who always sat in the back of the class, and I got a little pissed off at that. So one day I went to the back of the class where there was also blackboards and started writing back there. Of course, they had to turn their chairs around. Now they were in the front of the class. And after that, they evenly distributed themselves over the classroom so that some could sit in the back and some would be sitting in the front.
I had a professor in college that would always answer a student's phone if it rang during lecture.
Well, I was lucky enough to be teaching before the days of the cell phone, so
Yep.
I didn't have to deal with that.
It's tough when they have a zero tolerance policy in that. So first thing, I don't care if the kid's mother died. You can tell them that after class.
You got a family emergency, you can always call the school and they can send someone to the classroom.
Yeah, I had a teacher, Mad Dog might know him. I'll say his name later. He used to, I was working at Raytheon, and this is for graduate school. And he would either talk to the door or he'd write in the whiteboard and run out of ink. You know, this is in the days of whiteboard and not blackboards. And it was really, really strange. And he talked to himself. And he was really a terrible teacher. Then one day I took the limousine to DEC. They had transportation. You could pay for a ride up there because my car was in the shop. And I had my wife drop me off. And I talked about this teacher. What so happens is he also worked DEC. And he was in the limousine at the time. But I didn't mention his name. Anyway, it was, no, it wasn't John Flanagan. John was another guy. Could have been, but any case.
I had one student who had to travel for 2 hours in the morning to get to class because he came from Southern Connecticut to Hartford. And of course, he had to drive for 2 hours back. Plus, he worked a part-time job. So he was tired a lot of times if he had an early morning class like operating system design or compiler theory. And but he would fall asleep in class. And every once in a while, I would get to a really difficult part, and I would tell his friend who sat next to him, "Ollie, wake Tom up. This is a hard part. So he'd shove Tom. Tom would go, what? Huh? And say, okay, Tom, this is the hard part. It's over with. You can go back to sleep. Oh, okay.
I got to rest up for those Frisbee sessions.
Well, I always felt that I would teach the information that was in the book. First of all, I'd try and pick a really good book, and then I would teach the information, clarify the information in the book. So if you could read the book, you could typically get a pretty good grade on the test. I felt that my job there was to add to the book, not just, repeat from it. So I'd add to the book, but then I would take the test material directly out of the book. So if you could read the book and understand the book and answer those questions, then you could even get an A in the course. Well, plus you had to do the programming work and stuff like that. A lot of kids I taught were second generation immigrants. Their parents had come to the country. They were the first kids in their entire line to go to school. And, I just wanted to see them get a good job.
Yeah, that worked.
Mm-hmm. How long did you teach, Mad Dog?
Well, I taught full-time from 1977 to 1980. And then I left the school and I was working for Bell Labs, but I continued to teach at night. For the time that I was at Bell Labs, I taught at Merrimack College and Daniel Webster College. And then, but then I started traveling for DEC so much that it wasn't fair to me and the students that I would try and teach. It's one thing if you can find a friend of yours or something to teach something like Fortran or C or some of the languages or even database utilization, stuff like that. But I'd say, hey, could you mind stepping in for me for this class in compiler theory? And people would go, oh my God, I almost flunked that class twice. So I said, no, I have to stop teaching. But, in a way, we all teach, right? We all mentor people and stuff like that. So,
Well, if they almost flunked, does that mean they actually passed it?
We would start out we were a small school, and we would start off with 90 freshmen coming into a 2-year program. And we would typically graduate 28 to 80. I'm sorry, 28 to 30 after 2 years. Not all the kids flunked out. Some of the kids realized that this was not for them, and they left on their own steam.
Oh, yeah.
But we weren't an easy school. We weren't an easy class. This wasn't. We didn't have to make our money by graduating students. So, the people that left I had one guy that reached out to me lately. He sent me a letter that said he just retired from Cisco after 32 years, and our courses were the only formal education he'd ever gotten. He, like the rest of us, he learned a lot of stuff from magazines and articles on the web and stuff like that over the years. But his associates from Hartford State Tech was the only formal education he had ever gotten. I've had some of my students, they're vice presidents of large companies now. Some of them went on to get 4-year degrees and so forth and so on, but they all say that because we take kids who had never seen a computer in real life, had never touched a computer keyboard, had never written anything, and after 2 years, they knew something about compiler design, something about operating systems and how they worked, and database engines and how they worked and stuff. And it was, taking them from nothing. I mean, they thought that computers were going to think for them.
Yeah, I remember
All
that.
right. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, do you want to start the meeting now?
That's what I was going to ask.
Oh, okay.
Sure.
I was going to mention another anecdote, but if we want to start the meeting right away, then yeah, let's do that instead. Hey, Jerry, you want to do the introduction of the meeting so I have a place to cut it when I edit the YouTube video?
Excuse me.
Okay, we've got, this is Boston Linux and Unix user group meeting for December 21st, 2022. This will be the last meeting of the year. And today we're going to have Shankar Viswanathan to present home router and firewall using OPNsense.
Thank you, Jerry. So I'm hoping everybody can see my screen. Yeah. So this talk is about using OPNsense to set up your own home router / firewall, and kind of what I wanted to talk about today was to go over sort of the motivations for this new home network. So I completely revamped my network. Kind of what was the motivation for that? Some of the hardware and software choices that I looked at. Then we can go into some of the OPNsense basics, how I set up the router and overall network, look at some power performance metrics, and finally, if we have some time, I can do a demo of OPNsense running within a VM. So let's see how much time we have. So kind of motivation for why I went this route. Basically, what I had, maybe this is about a year ago. Somebody seeing blank screen, or is it visible?
I can see everything.
Yes, it's visible.
Okay. So basically, what I had was like a typical consumer router. Was like a TP-Link of some sort, running OpenWrt, and this was in my basement here. Like, so I live in a 2-family unit, and this router was, we have a finished part of the basement and then another floor. So this router was in the basement, and I had coax between the basement and the first floor, and put Mocha adapters on each side, and then so that I needed the Mocha adapter because the Wi-Fi was very poor. And the Mocha adapter kind of sat under our TV because the game console and other stuff needed Ethernet. And so this adapter had blinking lights, which I was fine with, but others in the family weren't so thrilled about. So this is what I had, and like I said, it kind of worked, but performance was poor in some rooms, and which we later found out. We have a lath and plaster walls. And we later found out that there were some of these walls had chicken wire in them. And so this created a perfect Faraday cage as far as Wi-Fi signals went. And then during the peak of the pandemic, when we were all working from home, school from home, everything on video, latency became bad, and I would have kids complain about their calls getting dropped and so forth. So this wasn't great. And then our ISP, I thought it was a problem with upstream bandwidth, because at that time I think I had a lower tier. Then I went to a higher tier, and then I found out that I actually never could saturate this tier. So kind of worked, but it wasn't great. So along with a bunch of other people, we all did some home remodeling during this pandemic. So we redid bathrooms in our house, and we took I took advantage of that to have the contractor put down some conduit and then lay out Cat6a cabling. And so this can do up to 10 gigabits. I take over distances less than 100 meters. So I had these wires installed, put ports in couple of the bedrooms, and then in my little area where I'm sitting right now, which is kind of my home office. So this was something that was just tacked on to general home remodeling. So that was great. But then what router? Should I stick to the old router and then get another kind of access point, or should I go with a sort of a more DIY approach and use a router focused OS? And sort of the title of the talk gives the thing away. I decided to go with a more DIY approach, and kind of the reasons for that is that it's less hassle. A lot of these consumer routers are starting to lock their firmware, so it's hard to go and flash OpenWRT or any of these kinds of open source firmware in there. And then previously, I've always had issues where I would research on the OpenWRT website, get a particular model of router, and then I get it, and then it's fine. It's like a V2 instead of V3 or something, and then it was always issues with that, and then that meant that it had different flash memory inside the router or different amount of RAM, and this meant I could only use a certain image or something wouldn't work at all. And so at least this was going back a few years now, but I had to return something and get another one just to get a different model or revision number. So I didn't want to deal with all that weirdness. And then there's more flexibility overall. If you run it on a somewhat more powerful hardware, then you can do other things besides what can fit on the sort of relatively small flash memories that these consumer routers tend to have. By the way, if you have any questions, please stop and ask anytime. So this was sort of the motivation for, or sort of reasoning behind why I chose the DIY approach. So then, well, if I want to do DIY, what router OS do I use? So I kind of thought about this and put down a few criteria that I wanted the OS to have. Right? Obviously, it needs to be secure and stable. Regular updates. This is one of the other problems with OpenWRT. Sometimes on these limited hardware, it's updating it is kind of more or less the same as reinstalling it from scratch. So I wanted something that was relatively simpler, similar to a typical Linux distro kind of update. And then something that was flexible, allowed a few more things, and had to be relatively easy to use. Long time ago, I did set up my own router with stock. I think it was Slackware Linux at this. This was back, I guess, 20 years ago, and then I had to mess with IP tables and did all of that by hand. That was a great learning experience, but with 2 kids and other responsibilities, I don't have that kind of time anymore. So I wanted something that was relatively easy to set up. And then it had to be open source and, with a reasonably active community, so that I could get, support, right, and questions and things like this. So these were kind of the high level criteria that I had going into this. And then in terms of more specific features, I wanted something with obviously had a full featured stateful firewall, DHCP server, VLAN support. So this is so that I can segment my network a little bit better, and also learn about VLANs. Needed WireGuard, VPN support, so that I can get to my home network on the go. And then a couple of optional things in terms of some level of DNS filtering or blacklisting, and if possible some QoS, so that my kids don't hog all the bandwidth playing games while I'm in an important BLU presentation. So these were some of the criteria. And then when I looked into it, okay, what kind of OSs would meet some of these criteria? And then there's basically came down to these 5. I know there are a few more, but these are the ones that I in my initial searches, these are the ones that popped up that seem to meet most of this criteria. So there's PFSense and OPNsense. Both of them are based on FreeBSD. And then, OpenWrt, IPFire, Untangle. There's also ViOS or VOS. I don't know how to pronounce that. Those are all, again, various Linux-based distributions. So I looked at all of them, and I decided to go with OPNsense. Again, the title of the talk gives that away. And kind of the reason for this is, all my devices at home are Linux based, and so just wanted to do something different, right? Again, another opportunity to learn BSD. I've used BSD a long time ago, but haven't touched it in a long time. So I thought, why not that? And then, in kind of looking between PFSense and OPNsense, just it seemed like the community behind OPNsense was more than what PFSense had, and PFSense is more controlled by a company. So seemed like OPNsense would be the better choice. So like I said, OPNsense is based on FreeBSD, which is actually forked out of PFSense. And PFSense itself is a fork of Monowall, which I think goes back almost 20 years at this point. So it has a big, long history. So the OPNsense itself was found. Some people are losing me. Am I still visible, audible?
No, the small tile that says SV screen shows the presentation. It's too small to see. But you're in the big one. It's just the white S and the green circle and a black background.
Yeah, your online, your shared screen is blank, and it's showing that the frame rate is not applicable.
Okay.
And it seems to lose it, so I'd probably exit and come back. I've seen that before on other people.
Yeah, it has a text message now saying video for SV screen is blank due to network bandwidth.
Interesting.
It's Ed's fault.
Okay. Can I? Maybe I will freeze my video, see if that helps. Okay, can you see it now?
We have a screen.
Much better.
Okay, all right. Well, my network needs more fixing then. Bandwidth was a problem. Okay, I'll go back. Okay, still visible?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Sorry about that. So yeah, I was saying, so OPNsense basically derives from monowall, and since it was started in about 2015, I think that's when it forked off of PFSense. Monowall, I think, ended. The guy who was maintaining it kind of stopped in 2015, and basically endorsed OPNsense as its like spiritual, successor. And so OPNsense itself was founded and has since been maintained by this company called the CISO AB, which is a Dutch company. And it's been continuously updated since then. It has a relatively easy to use UI, and following the theme of all the BSDs, it has fantastic documentation. I have the link up here, but really, the majority of the stuff that I wanted to do, I could just follow their online documentation and do it. I did see some other tutorials and other stuff in setting it up, but really, most of the information you need to set it up and configure it is all available on the OPNsense documentation. So this is very easy to use. So in terms of the major features, it has the firewall, DNS and DHCP servers, support for dynamic DNS. I have not set it up yet, but it does allow two-factor authentication for any changes to be made. VLAN support, link aggregation, failover, traffic shaping, VPN, and then there's a core list of packages, and there's also support for plugins. Some of the plugins come from the OPNsense sort of maintainers themselves, and there is others. So the other ones from like other community, maintainers. Somebody said about bridge support. I think that is there. I haven't checked. And then you can do like virus scanner, intrusion detection, all of these things. Some of it is in the base package, and other things like ClamAV you can go install via the plugins. So it kind of met all the criteria that I was interested in. And so in terms of installation of OPNsense, currently the images are available for AMD 64 only. I know people have been looking at supporting at least the 64-bit ARM versions. I don't know where that is in terms of production ready, but FreeBSD obviously runs on that, but the OPNsense specific bits, I don't know if they have all been ported over to ARM yet. OPNsense can be, you can install it from USB or flash drive, or via serial. You can do that over. If you have a monitor connected, you could do that with a display, or you can just do over a serial console. As with all the BSDs and FreeBSD, finding drivers that work can be tricky for certain devices, particularly for for a device like this, a router, the NICs tend to have some of the NICs tend to have issues, but the Intel ones are generally the best supported. Broadcom ones tend to have issues. The Realtek ones are somewhere in between. I think some of the older devices work reasonably well, but the newer ones, driver support may be tricky. And there's a nano image that's available for embedded devices. So this one doesn't have a writable file system. So all the writes go to RAM disk, and then the logs do not persist upon reboots. But if you want to install it on a relatively small device, then you can do that. So the standard file system that they recommend is ZFS. It also supports the standard BSD UFS file system, but I think most people ZFS. And you can install OPNsense either directly on bare metal hardware, or you could run that inside a VM. And my real system runs on a bare metal, but the demo, I managed to install it under KVM. So you could do it both ways. And then once you install it, the configuration, you could do it via the console CLI. You could use the web GUI, or once you enable the SSH daemon via the console, then you can SSH in from some other machine and do it, and then go through the rest of the configuration process. So it's relatively straightforward. The web GUI is obviously the most intuitive, easiest way. But if you have all the OPNsense documentation available, you could do most of it through the console also. So in terms of what the OPNsense developers recommend for hardware, for most, you could install it on really old wimpy machines, but if you want majority of those features that I talked about, if you want to enable a lot of them, then they recommend something greater than 1.5 gigahertz, dual core or better CPU. So mostly anything in the last 10 years should work okay. 4 gigabytes of RAM, but you could, if you want to enable some of the more deep packet inspection and some other things, antivirus scanning and so forth, then you're probably better off going to 8 gigabytes. Then you need either a serial console or some kind of video for the installation. They recommend about 120 gigabyte storage for the OS itself and whatever logs you care to save. And then you need 2 or more Ethernet ports, NIC ports. You can do it if on a machine, if you only have one NIC. You could do it if you have a VLAN capable, managed switch. So it's called router on a stick. You can Google that. Basically, you get only half the bandwidth of your Ethernet. So if you have a gigabit Ethernet NIC and your upstream internet bandwidth is less than 500 megabits, you should be okay. Not ideal, but doable. So this is the recommended hardware, and so I thought, okay, what hardware do I want to use for my setup? So sort of the first idea, and I've been looking at these PC engines, APU boards for a while for some other uses, but it seemed like a neat thing to do, and by some Google searches did show that other people had successfully gotten it working. And so I found this kit, which has the board and the case and power supply and so forth. And like I said, people have managed to load OPNsense and had good reviews about getting it to work. And this whole thing costs about $225 for the kit. Unfortunately, when I was looking at this, this was at the height of the chip shortage and all that last year. It was completely unobtainable. So all the stores online were sold out. So I had to move past this. The other option was to get these various, low power fanless PCs, mini PCs, and there's various brands. You can get them from your various online retailers. So there's some by Deciso itself, which is the company behind OPNsense, and then Netgate is the company behind PFSense. So these two companies, do their own hardware, as in their branded hardware. And then there are some other companies like Protectly and Quantum. So they all have, machines that look like the picture here. This one is from Quantum, but all these boxes look pretty similar. They have somewhere, depending on the model, 4 or 6 gigabit, Ethernet ports. And if you buy the ones from Deciso or Netgate, they'll come with PFSense or OPNsense already preloaded. I could not get very clear power numbers for them, but generally, I think what people were saying is that it's somewhere between 15 to 35 watts, depending on the model. And the price range is anywhere between $300 to $700, depending on what class processor and how much memory these machines had. So that was another option. And then I found this subreddit about OPNsense, and then when you go down that rabbit hole, there's all kinds of other suggestions that people had in terms of what you could do. So one of the other popular options is to buy used slim PC or a thin client, and some of them have an open PCIe slot. So these are the thin client ones, and you can see them in libraries and places like that. And so you can buy the used ones, off eBay. Add a 4-port NIC, as you see in this picture here, and typically they have a very limited amount of storage. So you can either add a larger disk or use like an external USB drive for storage. These things with the NIC tend to draw about 30 watts, so similar to those built boxes that we saw before. And then it's about $200 to get this whole thing. Of course, the prices vary wildly from time to time. So if you want to go down this, you need to have some patience, because these are somewhat hard to get at reasonable prices. So then, as you go down all of these subreddits, you find people doing all kinds of other crazy stuff. So then, one of the ideas, why don't we just get a one U rack mount server with a bunch of Ethernet ports? And as I was looking for these things, this is what I found. So this is a machine called the Kemp Loadmaster 3400, and it's actually meant to be a load balancer, a web front end, and this is 1U, but it is a limited depth. It's not very deep as compared to a standard 1U rack mount server. So this kind of looked interesting. It has 8 gigabit Ethernet ports on the front, 2 USB 2.0 slots, and a Cisco style, serial port with, the RJ45 jack. And on the back, it has a VGA port and a couple more USB ports, and then the power. Inside, it's taking a while. Okay, inside, there's a picture. It's not great, but you can see sort of the power supply here on the bottom right. Under this heatsink is the CPU, couple of sticks of RAM, and then up here you see the 8 PHYs for the Ethernet controllers, and then a couple of SATA ports for the disk. So pretty basic server board. And again, I apologize for this picture, but this is the BIOS menu. It shows it's a 4-core Sandy Bridge Xeon. So this is from, I think it is 2011 or 2012, somewhat of that vintage. And it has 8 gigabytes of DDR3 RAM. So this is pretty interesting, and I paid $53.11 for this. It didn't come with any disk, but I had a bunch of spare ones lying around, 2.5-inch laptop drive. I didn't want to put a SSD in because I know there will be a lot of log writes, and I didn't want to kill the thing. Plus, I had a few, like I said, a spare discs, regular spinning Rust discs anyway, so I went ahead and used those. So I got that, and OPNsense installed really without a problem. Just put that on a USB thumb drive, and then booted it up, and it all just worked perfectly. All the 8 gigabit Ethernet ports got recognized, and it loads these drivers for EM. So the ports get labeled EM0 through EM7. Because I wanted to go for the overkill, I once I configured one port as for the WAN, I link aggregated 2 ports to my main switch for the 2 LAN ports. And then I had so I separately got couple of special, like separate wireless access points, and then I set up 3 VLANs, and then mapped this both to the hardwired network on the switches, as well as to Wi-Fi, the SSIDs. So I have one internal network that is for my NAS and my desktop, and then I have a devices LAN, which basically has most of the devices at home. All our phones, printer, internet streaming devices, game consoles, all that stuff gets put on the device network. And then there's a third one for guests. My kids' friends come over and they want to play or use the internet, then they get the guest network. So the devices on the internal network can access stuff on the devices network, but not vice versa. The only exception is for certain devices that need access to files on the NAS, and just that one port is open for those specific devices. So that's how I kind of segmented my network. And then I configured WireGuard for remote access. So I have WireGuard clients on my laptops as well as phones. And so if I need to get to some file in the NAS, for example, I can VPN in through WireGuard and access it that way. So, relatively simple setup, but seems to be working for us. This is, crude picture of kind of what the network looks like. So I have a cable modem connected out to the internet, feeds into this OPNsense router, and then there are these two link aggregated connections going over to
live streaming is on.
Okay, all set.
Okay. Wait, why did this go here? Sorry, lost my. Okay. Yeah. So I was saying these two links get link aggregated. Not so much for bandwidth, just because I could do it. I did that, and then I have two.
We lost the bandwidth. Oh, it's back in.
Is everything okay?
Yeah, it's back in.
Okay. All right. So I have two separate access points, both connected over those Cat6 cables that we laid, and they're both ceiling mounted, and one on each floor, and kind of one is placed closer to the front of the house and one closer to the back of the house, so kind of staggered. And then I have other Ethernet cables connecting to these different devices, and then a bunch of other things connected over the Wi-Fi. So seems to be working great so far. And a couple of screenshots here of the installation process. Once when you boot in with the thumb drive, you get this prompt, and looks like a typical Debian or that kind of install process. You can just either do like a live boot and then test it out, or you can go ahead and install it like that. And this is the console, and you can see the network interfaces, and then you have a bunch of menu prompts for what you want to do, right? There's a question about what wireless access points. So I bought a couple of Ubiquiti access points, and they're like you can mount them on a wall or the ceiling. So I had them mounted on the ceiling, and I had made sure to have network drops over there. And the nice thing about that is that those access points are power over Ethernet. So my switch has a few ports that can provide that power over Ethernet. So I didn't need separate electrical, like power supply to the access point. So just everything gets powered by the switch. And here's a throwback XKCD about having to boot BSD. Thankfully, I didn't have any such problems. It just worked. And wanted to do some performance. So in here I have two different machines connected. I think when I did this test, they were connected to two of the Ethernet ports directly on the router. I also did this experiment with going through the switch, and then through iPerf you can verify that both upstream and downstream connections I could get to about 930 megabits, which is about the limit for a gigabit Ethernet connection. So I was getting full bandwidth simultaneously, duplex over this. In theory, because I link aggregated those, I could get higher speed, but I don't have any single machine that can do more than gigabit Ethernet. So I don't have 2.5 gig or 10 gig NICs on any of my machines. So, and then the switch is a gigabit switch anyway. I could get more, but I don't have a way to get there. So this was just within my home network, and then I also did kind of the standard speed test, both over the wired network and over Wi-Fi, and I'm getting close to or slightly higher than the sort of the internet tier that I have from my ISP. So the Wi-Fi works better in the same room. If I am one room away, it kind of drops by 15-20%, but it's not too bad. So kind of everything, once everything was set up, performance seemed to be okay. And today, oddly, is the first time I've had bandwidth problems.
Well, it may not be with Jitsi. It may not be you.
Maybe, I don't know. And then I hadn't really done a whole lot of power measurements, but when I was talking about this, like Brian DeLacy, he poked me and said, "Hey, what about the power?" And then that motivated me to bust out my kilowatt meter and then do some power measurements. So, this is a rack mount server. It's not designed to be lower power. So once I plugged my modem, the cable modem, the router, and the switch, and I just left it there for a couple of days, and it measured an average of about 89 watts. And this includes the power over Ethernet supplied to the two access points. The router alone averaged about 65 watts. So this is double than what you could get out of those more custom-made machines. Actually, just a couple of days ago, I looked into what could be done in terms of tweaking the CPU power management in OPNsense, and from 65 watts, I could get it down to 53 watts, bringing the total power over another 2-day period from 89 watts on average to 77 watts on average. Not big, but at today's electricity prices, like anything is good. So the kind of changes I made was to lower the CPU frequency down to 1600 megahertz. This was adaptive earlier, and so I don't think this helped a whole lot, maybe saved a small amount, but the bigger one was to enable the CPUs to go down to a CPI C3 state, which is a much lower power state when the CPU cores are idle. By default, so these things at the bottom, you can see these settings. OPNsense calls them tunables, and the frequency levels, the way it represents them are, this is the frequency / the power. So this 95,000 is 95 watts. So this is quoted in terms of milliwatts. And you can see it's the TDP on Intel's website for this chip does list it as 95 watts average. But if you go boost, this 3101 is not really a frequency, but it represents the boost state, and it can go even higher than 95 watts, but for relatively small periods of time. And then if you go all the way down to 1600, it stays fixed at about 40.5 watts. With the adaptive setting, it didn't really go to these higher frequencies very often. Occasionally it would do, but now I'm basically forcing it to stick to this level, which is this frequency setting. And then in terms of the CX state supported, it listed C1, C2, and C3. But by default, the lowest C state that it was allowed to go to was only C1. So what it shows here is C1, it takes about 1 millisecond to enter and exit C1 state, 80 milliseconds for C2, and 104 milliseconds for C3. So there is obviously a cost involved in going to these deeper states, and I wasn't sure how well the system would work if C3 was enabled, if this 104 milliseconds was going to be a problem when some big demand showed up. Thankfully, hasn't been a problem. I have, like I said, it's only been 3 or 4 days since I've done this, and so far I haven't experienced any problems. So this, I think, this C3 state is saving me most of those 12 watts that I gained from this.
In which case is the potential pain of not having adaptive CPU for surges not worth it? Should you go back to adaptive CPU?
That's what I'm wondering. I have to go back and measure if I go set the frequency back to adaptive, and maybe it's just half a watt or something that might be, and then I might get better performance. I just left it here for now, Bill, just to kind of see if I have any problems. But you're right. Maybe
understood.
Maybe adaptive is a better way to go. But
adaptive would probably help you work off the 104 millisecond latency on waking up.
That's true. The other thing somebody suggested was to leave. So this machine has 4 cores, so I could leave 1 core at C1. Like I can say, so these settings here, like it's you dev CPU .0, so that's CPU 0. I only showed CPU 0 here, but basically I have it set for 0, 1, 2, and 3. But one of the suggestions was that let's say for CPU 0, you say the lowest is C1, and then the other 3 CPUs can go to C3. So maybe that's another option. If there is a certain demand, then the CPU 0 can quickly exit the C state and handle that. But yeah, I haven't fiddled with it more. I don't know if there's some more savings to be had. The other thing I found is the CPU fan, the system fans don't really spin down. Just seems to be going at a constant speed. I haven't played around with the BIOS to see if there is some adaptive fan speed control. This thing is sitting in my basement, so the noise and other things don't bother anybody else. So I haven't. If it was sitting here next to me, I would have been more motivated to go take a look. But it's out of sight. I think that was my last slide. I can go to the demo maybe quickly. Are there any questions before I go there? Okay, I'll take that as a no. So let me switch to.
Actually, one thing I was wondering, you got that load balancing device? Was that on eBay? I remember you said it was like $51.
That was $50 on eBay about a year ago.
Okay.
Yeah. There are other models of this. Like there's a 2200, which I think is a little bit older, and then there's a 3600 and something else. But actually, there are a bunch of devices like this. There are, other people have taken like firewalls from Sophos. A lot of them are x86 cores on the inside. Similarly, there is like a lot of them are standard like 1U super micro boards. And different people are basically like just rebadging them. So you can go and find a bunch of different of these um, load balancers and firewalls and things like this, which costs a lot if you want to get the original license for those things. So when I got this, they had removed the disk because the disk had the original load balancer software and the license for it. Now, without that, the machine was obviously worth a lot less.
So you basically use it as is, other than adding hard drive, right? You didn't have to replace the motherboard or anything?
Nope, nothing. So I got it as is. And they even sent the power cord and the serial cable. I didn't even have to get those. I just had an old I think it was like a 500 gig 2.5 inch disc, and I just stuck that in there. Okay. Let me go over to the demo portion. This is Proxmox. I don't know if anyone here has used it before, but it's basically a layer on top of the standard KVM hypervisor. And it's meant to mimic some of the things that you get out of VMware ESXi and things like that. So basically, you install Proxmox on your machine, and then if you go to the particular web address, you get the options to set it up. So this is the host, and then it shows you the VMs that you install. So I think I originally set this up to test some different Debian images. I deleted all of them, and then I have OPNsense as the only VM at the moment. You can. This is the first time I used OPNsense, and I was again very surprised at how easy it was to set up. You could follow a couple of quick tutorials on how it's done. But basically, you go to the local instance. You can upload whatever ISO images you want, and then VM disks, and then you can go install this. So I got OPNsense as the only VM here, and you can go to the hardware section here and then select what you want to do. So if you want to go to processors, I click edit here. I can decide how many cores I want to allocate, and then sort of compute units. If I want to limit this to have lower priority, I could go change this. And then some of the other options here, sort of the only thing that I enabled was AES for the hardware acceleration. Similarly, you can add the network devices. So I am actually running this on an old laptop, and it has only one built-in NIC port, but I added a USB device. So I think if I went here under network, you can see that I have the built-in LAN, which is this ENP1S0, and then this one is my USB NIC adapter. I created two bridges, one that connects. It's only one port per bridge. I don't have to do this, but it's easier if you do it. So the built-in one is basically my LAN, and the other one, the USB one, I pass through to the VM, and that acts as that's my WAN port in quotes. So that's basically all there is. So you configure this, you install OPNsense over there, and off you go. So once OPNsense is installed, you can go to that and you configure it, the basic LAN address. You are greeted with this login prompt. So if I type that in, it takes me, it'll take you to this lobby screen by default. And this kind of shows you what the network looks like. So here it's showing that it is 2 KVM cores that I allocated. I gave it, I think, I gave it 3 gigabytes of memory and some amount of disk, 64 gigs in this case. As you can see, it's not using very much, very small amount of disk space. These are my interfaces, LAN and WAN. Since these are virtual adapters, it shows up as 10 gig, but it's obviously not 10 gig. It's only a gigabit Ethernet. And you can see the addresses. So this is the internal LAN address of this device, and this is the WAN address. And this is what my real OPNsense firewall gives me. And you can enable some of these widgets. You can go here and select if you want to do other kinds of. So I can add a traffic graph if I want, and it'll show traffic through the system. So it's pretty quick dashboard to give you an idea of what is happening. And then, one thing I forgot to show, right? In Proxmox, you can go and access the console of both the host as well as the VM. So I can go here and I can do shell, and this opens a root shell on the Proxmox sort of base OS, and I can also go to the particular VM instance, click on console, and I see the OPNsense console. So after it booted, you're greeted with this screen. So it shows you your interfaces and your SSH signatures and so forth. So you can do I can log into the console here, and it shows you it gets you to this menu, which is the screenshot that I pasted in my slides, and then you can do different things right from here. But configuring it is a lot easier from the GUI. So the menu is pretty nicely laid out on the left here. So if you go to reporting and traffic, you can see the same graph that you could have enabled as the widget in the initial one. So this shows you what traffic is going, and here I only have 2 interfaces, but in my if you have other like virtual LANs or other ports, you can enable or disable those ones, and then it kind of shows you what IP addresses or addresses are being used. So this network is currently talking to these various addresses. So this is kind of the summary, and then if you go down to system, under access, you can right now only the root user is set up. If you want, you can add another normal user or another sysadmin account. You can add those. Under configuration, this is kind of a nice thing. You can download the current configuration as an XML file and save that off. and then later on you could wipe your whole OPNsense installation, reinstall it, and then you can load that same config file and restore the config. It's pretty simple. I tried it; it actually works. They also have an option if you want to, if you choose to do it, you can have automatic backups enabled to your Google Drive. I think you can. There's also other plugins that you can get that can back up to like a Nextcloud instance or some other cloud storage, Amazon S3 and so forth. So you can get some plugins that can do that. But this is like a very easy thing to do. So periodically you can just save the config. So what I do is I don't have automatic backups, but I make it a point before I make any changes to save off the working config. And then if I mess something up, I just go and restore the last known good one. Then if you go under firmware and status, you can see which version it is. And now I purposely didn't update this one just to kind of show you how easy it is. You could say check for updates, and then it's fetching these things and says this many packages to have updates, and it shows you a summary here of what all deltas there are since the previous one. So it's very easy to kind of see what is being upgraded since your last change, and then you can decide if you want to do it. And it also will tell you if whether or not and here. So it'll tell you whether or not this requires a reboot, which I think is very helpful, because I don't want to do this because it'll automatically, if you enable it, it'll automatically reboot, and I don't want to do this at a time when others might be on the network. So I generally do this, some evening when the rest of my family is already in bed. It's, and then if you actually go here, you can see all the different packages that are available, which ones are installed, which one you could install, and then all the different plugins. So there's a whole bunch. Some of them are from the the OPNsense folks itself, and others are third party. So WireGuard actually comes in as a plugin. I found it. I mean, it has everything. At least I was interested in finding, either as a package or as a plugin. So and yeah, this shows you all the different versions that I've released, and it shows you I'm at a really old version, and there's a bunch of updates that happened since then. So the OPNsense itself gets updated twice a year, similar to Ubuntu. So there's one in January and there's one in July. So this is the 22.7, which is July of this year. So next month there'll be a 23.1 release. Let's see, what else did I want to show?
So we should go check and see which security bug fixes you failed to install, huh?
This is my actual external facing one is up to date. I did that.
Okay.
Actually, no, I am one version behind. I'm 7.9. I haven't got the 10 that just got released today. So I have not applied this latest.
Just released today is fair. I think it's sweet and cute that you think nobody uses Wi-Fi in bed.
I generally have to get permissions to make sure, hey, network is going to go down for 2 minutes or whatever it takes to reboot.
I don't bother with permission if the router needs rebooting. It's probably bad for everybody.
Yeah. But you know, it's you can just come here and see if there's anything new that you need to apply. And what I don't know is whether you can automatically do this if you so choose. I haven't found that setting. Maybe there is somewhere in which you can say automatically download and update, don't ask me, which may be a good or bad thing depending. And then okay, what else did I want to talk about? Okay, if we go down to settings, administration, you can choose to have it. This is all internal. You by default, nothing is allowed. So only sort of traffic going out to the WAN is allowed. So I found it has very, very good sane defaults, and it defaults to actually even the web GUI here defaulting to HTTPS. You could use the built-in private certificate, or if you really want to go out and do set up a domain and do let's encrypt, you can go off and do all that. Secure shell is disabled by default. I enabled it just because I wanted to log in and do some things. Obviously, very bad idea if you're doing this externally to permit root login and password login. So on my actual firewall, these are all disabled. I have SSH enabled, but it's only via key, and it's not on the WAN, only through LAN. If I have to come in through the WAN, I have to go through WireGuard VPN. And then, yeah, you can select whether you want VGA console or you want to go through serial console for access. And then under general, these are some of the basic settings. Host name, time zone, DNS server. You can set up all of these. I just picked Quad 9. And under miscellaneous, this is the power D. So this is the power daemon, and this is what was there before. I had it at adaptive, and if you just set it to minimum, it'll go to the minimum frequency, which is what I did on my machine. But by default, it is high adaptive, which means it will by default it won't go to the lowest frequency, but something higher than that. But it's still adaptive, as in it can go to the fastest frequency. I think that was the main thing here. And then here under tunables are various network parameters and VM virtual memory parameters, and you can add or remove some things. So I use this to basically set the minimum C state to C3 for all the CPUs. So you can simply go add and put the parameter name and the value and a description. Pretty straightforward. And the first time you log in actually takes you to this wizard. I'm not going to go through this now, but it's this is where you can set the basic DNS servers and DHCP range and things like this. So it's pretty easy. All right. So then we come down to interfaces. This is where things get interesting. Under overview, it shows you all the different interfaces that I have. I do not know what these mean, but this is obviously loopback, and then our two interfaces that I map to the LAN and the WAN. If you go to the LAN port, you can say you can enable, and then This is where, like, for example, if I go on to the WAN port, by default, it blocks any private networks and any bolt-on networks. So anything that is not assigned is blocked by default. And this list of what are unassigned IPs, at least in the IPv4 space, I don't think there's anything left here unassigned, but generally any ranges that are not assigned are blocked. And I think this goes off, and there's a cron job to go refresh this list every 48 hours or something. I don't remember exactly what the frequency is, but again, this is a case of same defaults being applied. And you can set the DHCP configuration if you wanted to for the WAN port. It's set to DHCP. You can set it to static if you have a static IP on your WAN. On the LAN, it's similar. So the LAN gets a static IP address, and you can set that up, your net mask, and so forth. And then here in the assignments tab is where you designate which interface is what port. So you can pick, these are the two available network interfaces, and you can assign LAN or WAN. And if you want, you can create more here. And then if you come down to the other types is where you can do things like the link aggregation and VLAN. So if you want to create a new VLAN, you go here and you can describe your device, and you can say what is going to be the parent. So set that to LAN, and then you can put the VLAN tag and all of this. So this is what I used in my actual router to create those 3 VLANs that I talked about. And the parent of all those interfaces is the LAN port. And then we come to the firewall. So under, I'm trying to look at my notes here, make sure I covered the most important things. Okay, so under NAT, you have port forward. So if you want to forward external ports to some internal port on an internal IP, you can go do that. By default, it adds this rule so that it allows SSH and HTTP to access the router itself. So it calls it the anti-lockout rule, so that you don't disable this and somehow get locked out of your firewall. Of course, if you did do that, you can always go through you'll have to go through the console or the serial and then reset that if you did manage to mess this up. And then under rules, this is where it gets interesting. You have your LAN, and by default, anything on the LAN is allowed to go out. And if you go on the WAN, basically nothing is enabled. So these default set of rules are all those things that I mentioned. So all private networks are blocked. All this list of bogons, which is basically an alias that already exists. And if you want to create other aliases, you can do that too under the aliases tab here. But these are all same defaults, and I just here have a rule just to show you how easy it is to create one. So action is pass, or you can say block or reject. Enable this rule on the interface when direction in, if it's IPv4, any source, the destination is this firewall address. So that can be either the WAN address or one of the LAN addresses. And if the port is SSH, I want to allow. I can this is just so that if you want to come in over the WAN over SSH, you can allow this rule. Obviously, it may not be a good idea to do it, but this is just to show you how a rule is constructed. And same thing, you can say, like in my case, I wanted my desktop, which is on my internal VLAN, to access things that are on my other devices LAN. So then I can add a rule that says if the inbound port is on from my internal VLAN and the destination is the devices VLAN, then allow that traffic in. But then in my devices VLAN, I only allow those devices to talk to the WAN and nothing else. So you can basically enable these rules. And there's some things called floating rules which apply to all interfaces by default. So a lot of these, like allow ping and things like this, there are some things that are enabled by default, and the SSH lockout rules. These apply to all interfaces. So I think that's the kind of major things about. So under log files, you can go to live view, and this is showing all the activity that is happening. And if you want to filter, you can go filter. So I only want to see things that are getting blocked. So I can just add that rule, and now it's only showing things that are being blocked. And this is things that external things are trying to come in. These are all getting blocked both on v4 and v6. So these are some other devices in my network trying to get send broadcast packets or like other UDP requests that are now getting blocked. So you can log them, and you can save these off. Like if you have a particular rule set, you can save off that rule set, and then you can load that again later. So it's pretty flexible that way. What else? So next is VPN. So by default, it only comes with IPsec and OpenVPN. But like I showed you, if you go on to the plugins thing and then install the WireGuard plugin, you'll see another entry here for WireGuard. And then there's a whole bunch of settings to configure any of these VPNs if you choose to. And when you add a VPN, then if you go back to the interfaces tab, there'll be another interface that is created, a virtual interface that is created for that particular VPN interface, and then you can go click onto that, and then you can set up the rules for that separately. So you can say, so for example, you can say anything that's coming over the VPN is only allowed to talk to this subnet, or traffic can go out back to the WAN. So like if you're in a coffee shop and you want to basically tunnel all your traffic through your home router, you could choose to do it that way. The other things that you can set up with the VPN is if you have things like zero tier or Tailscale, one of these kind of peer-to-peer VPNs. So you can join all your devices in a network. You can set it up that way. Cloudflare tunnels, like all kinds of things, you can enable it that way if you choose to. So it's very flexible. So once you have that interface defined, you'll see under rules, you'll see the same thing. You'll see that WireGuard or OpenVPN interface, and then you can configure specific DHCP ranges and specific firewall rules for any traffic coming over that interface. The last kind of subgroup here is services, and you go under DHCP v4. And then here you see all the DHCP settings for this particular LAN interface. So some of this is set up in that wizard itself, but then you can always come here and modify it. So you can specify what range of DHCP addresses you want to specify, and then if you want to override the overall DNS settings for this interface, you can say you can provide your own VLAN or like interface specific DNS servers and gateway. And you can click here and you can see the leases. So this is this laptop connected over here to this. That's the only IP address that's configured. And if I want to change this to a static address, I can just go here, click on this plus, and it automatically the MAC address, and then I can specify what static IP address I want to assign to this device. So then from then on, this laptop can be configured to get the same fixed IP address. Even though on the laptop side, you still configure it as DHCP, but OPNsense will hand out the same DHCP address each time that device connects. That's about DHCP. And the other thing I wanted to cover was DNS. So it comes with the unbound DNS server. You can enable that. If you want DNSSEC support, you can configure that. Pretty easy to do. I did that, and it's very easy. And then you can go here under block lists, and then you have a DNS blacklist. So you can go here. There's a bunch of pre-configured lists that you can enable. So if I want to just disable Facebook, I go do that, or any of these ads or trackers, those kinds of privacy kind of things. So this simple tracker, for example, blocks any of these web cookie sites and trackers like that. So you can go enable this. This is not as flexible or easy to configure like something like a Pi-hole. If you wanted to do network-wide ad blocking, it's fairly decent, but I don't think it's as easy to use as a Pi-hole. I previously did have a Pi-hole and I got rid of it, partially because that Raspberry Pi died and I haven't had time to look at why. But this thing seems to be working reasonably enough in terms of keeping the really nasty bits out of my network. But if you wanted to have a separate Pi-hole instance, there are various tutorials on how you can do that. So you can have here unbound DNS basically forward the query over to a Pi-hole and get the response back. So you can set it up that way if you choose to. But and then there are some plugins that can do more advanced. So there's a plugin called Zen Armor. If I go. Maybe it's a package. I think it's a package. I forgot where it is. But basically, there's a package called Zen Armor, which is what they call the next gen firewall, and it can do more detailed, content blocking. If you wanted to, let's say prevent. I want to prevent my kid from watching YouTube between 9 p.m. and 6 a.m. Then I could set it up that way. it's more granular, access management. That's possible. I can't now find where it is, but it's somewhere here. And then there is, uh, if you want to do more kind of intrusion detection and intrusion prevention, they use this is the default one, which is Suricata, and you can set that up if you want to do detect threats or things from primarily from inside your network. If you have inside, you can set it up to try and monitor that and stop those things. I think that is most of what I wanted to cover. Any other questions, either about my choice of network, or whether some questions about OPNsense itself?
No, it looks pretty impressive.
Yeah, I think it looks like a very nice system.
Yeah, I've been very pleasantly surprised how well it works and how easy it is to play around. And like I said, if you mess something up, just make sure you save off your config at the beginning before you play around with things. And then if you really screw it up, you can just go back, restore the good state, and then you're up and running again. So what a lot of people do is have a separate, if you have more than 2 NICs on your machine, you set one as LAN, one as WAN, and then the third one as a management port. So you could connect through there, and you configure that management interface to have carte blanche access to everything inside. So if you mess something up, you can just go connect your as long as you didn't screw up the management interface itself, you can plug in your laptop or desktop into that management port, and then access the UI and restore to the last known good state. So that's kind of a best practice that a lot of people do. And since I have 8 ports, I did that. So I have a dedicated management port on my router. Any other questions?
No, it doesn't seem like it.
I think it was a great talk. I really appreciated it.
Thank you.
I think the amount of investigation you made into different operating systems and stuff and different distributions was very helpful.
Thanks. And
Yep.
To your talk, I guess it was a couple of years ago, Mad Dog, about people buying systems and not buying hardware or software. They want solutions, right? If you go and buy one of those pre-built things, you get everything pre-configured. So if you are not inclined to install all of this, or if you want commercial support, you can buy one of those devices and they come with the support. But even if you go the DIY route, it was fairly easy. Even for I don't claim to be a network expert of any sort. I know basics of how TCP/IP works, but I was able to get it working relatively quickly.
What I always done in the past, well, I still do now, it's I just basically buy an off-the-shelf Wi-Fi router, and I disable DHCP on the Wi-Fi router and run an internal DHCP server in my head. And that way I get more flexibility. That was the single biggest limitation I found on the off-the-shelf routers.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thanks, Shankar. It was a great meeting.
Thank you. It was great.
Thanks. I enjoyed it.
And if you have any questions, just feel free to email me. It's on my email is on the BLU site. So
Yep.
Oh, it just occurred to me, I forgot to post something on IRC to let people know about the live stream. I usually do that at the beginning of the meeting every month, but it slipped my mind this time.
Just in case I don't see you guys again before the holidays end, Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.
Yep, same.
Same to you.
thank you. Same to you.
And happy Hanukkah to those who appreciate that.
That too.
Of course.
And don't forget Kwanzaa and Diwali.
No,
I don't know if anyone in this chat.
we've
So-
got
Well,
some
Diwali is already
solstice
over.
traditions in this house for tonight.
Yep.
Okay, I'm going to stop the live stream.